welcome to another Stage to Sofa. Today, I am joined by the lovely Laine Rettmer, who is a visual artist and opera director. Now, Laine's productions have been praised as wickedly smart and devastatingly funny by the New York Times, as well as not only profound, but shattering by the Observer. Laine's work explores performance, gender, and methods of social control. And she's not only a really innovative, wonderfully forward-thinking director, she's also the sculpture department's teacher at Rhode Island School of Design. So Laine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Such a pleasure. And you have had such an amazingly varied career, which has just blown my mind when I read about it. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And I just want to start by saying, how are you coping with this huge transition that we've all been faced with? And how has it impacted your work on a day-to-day basis?
Gosh, I mean, I think like everyone, having productions canceled and having these incredible, opportunities that maybe you were looking forward to, and the amount of work that you might have done. Because I know that I've had productions that I've, been working with for 6 months with designers and singers. And then of course now we're not going to be doing them. So it's quite tragic, but at the same time, the amount of communication that's been happening now and the amount of checking in and making sure that everyone's okay and sort of putting this sort of emotional quality forward in our priorities when we're checking in with one another is pretty amazing. I feel like it really changes the discourse that we're having with each other and makes it incredibly personal.
And have you conducted most of your sort of next stages of possible digital projects online via Zoom with all of your clients? Has that been something that you've been sort of working on as a platform?
It has. We've been able to push forward with a number of different pieces, although the ones that have to have been pushed until the following spring season, those were kind of just like, of course, waiting until we get a little bit farther down the road to see what's happening.
Fantastic. And I can see you have to wait until you have a clearer picture in order to do that.
Yeah,
so absolutely understand
exactly.
that. Now your career, it's gone from strength to strength and it's expanded so quickly and developed into such an organic place. And I'm just wondering, at what point did you really fall in love with opera directing?
Gosh, I fell in love with opera directing probably when I was 24 or 25. It was really soon after getting out of university. I went for stage direction to NYU. And I loved that. I loved being at the school. I loved learning about how one operates as a director and works with performers. But as soon as I got out, I was so disenchanted and so uninterested actually in staging theater. It became something that I wasn't really drawn to, and I didn't find plays or didn't find the opportunities that I was really excited by. So I first directed or assistant directed on an opera, and I was in BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and the orchestra, the band, was practicing between rehearsals, and they were playing Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians. And it was lunchtime. I was in the like audience, and I just was able to lie down on the floor and listen to them perform. And it was that moment where I was like, this is so different. Having music and having that connection with musicians completely changed everything for me. So I'd grown up playing piano and singing in choirs and playing violin in an orchestra. So it just like clicked for a second that I thought, oh, of course, the addition of music inside of performance for me makes it dynamic. It brings emotion forward in a really different way. And the amount of skill that you're getting to be on stage with is so astronomical that it's a privilege to be in the room with the musicians and the instrumentalists.
That's so exciting. And I love that moment that you described when you're led on the floor and it just clicks, because I think when you have that moment, it means that you're on the right track, I think. I'm just wondering now, how much has your visual art informed your stage directing in opera?
I mean, it really goes both ways. I think my opera directing ends up really informing my visual art as well. But at Rhode Island, for instance, at RISD, I teach in the sculpture department, but I teach primarily media and performance. So my bent is always really in video, or in creating like video systems, projection systems. And so when I direct operas now, they very frequently include live cinema, multiple cameras, sources. Um, so that piece feels very clear that the technology sort of comes into play there. And I think that I've always tended to enjoy abstraction or sort of metaphorical staging. And that I feel like has gotten stronger, just both my ability to speak in metaphor, but also my desire to incorporate sort of not the strange or the uncanny, but sort of those moments and those gestures that aren't as explainable by narrative. So I think I've gotten more comfortable with that. And then as well, my visual art, I'm frequently working with opera singers or trying to reinterpret arias, for instance, into something that is a totally different way of approaching that material.
Fabulous. And I think it's really interesting when it has another layer of dynamic of visual art, like you've just said, the videos in your operas. Is that something that you feel should be used worldwide in terms of having, like you said, another way to express a certain gesture or emotion?
I think that, I mean, it really depends on the director and the way that their brain works. I think there's people who do it so incredibly well. Katie Mitchell is such an incredible director who is able to do it with such finesse. But her style is, is her own, and has been developed. I mean, she's like a, she's one of the big ones. But I love it. I love seeing other people utilize technology. I'm always curious what it's like with the singers, because I don't think it's right for every singer either. Um, to be able to operate in that way and to be able to have this sort of intimacy that working with media ironically brings, because you're so close to the action very frequently. But I love it.
So Laine, what is your go-to process for when you get a new opera and you've got a whole bunch of new singers and you're about to start staging? What is the process for you there?
Well, if it's going to involve media, for instance, we're working right now on a Turn of the Screw that is going to be a live camera piece in Miami at the Vizcaya Museum. What I like to do is let singers know right away that we're going to be working with cameras, because I have definitely had the very interesting situations of showing up to, the first week before rehearsals, that you get the like frantic email from a singer that's like, I didn't know we were going to be on camera. Oh my God, do we have to? Which doesn't happen as much anymore. But I like to prepare an entire sort of dossier to hand to everybody that is a breakdown of all of the stage direction, like all of the motion on the stage, how it's going to work, because I prefer to stage everything before we get into the room, and then know that about probably like 30%, 40%, sometimes 80% of that staging goes away, but that we have a plan, and that singers can through that see sort of what action I have planned, where we're going to be moving, how involved the cameras are going to be, and then to send that packet out a couple of weeks before we start rehearsal, so that we can have conversations about how I'm seeing their character functioning, as well as that can be a really useful thing for stage management and assistant directors, so that we kind of know what do we have to have in the room, and they can already start writing in their blocking. And I say that partially because that type of preparation can be very necessary when you have, say, a 2-week rehearsal process, and you have to just book it through whatever 3 hours of music, and also because when you add in video, the choreography of that and choreographing in the tech becomes its own sort of like wicked process. So we have technical rehearsals that start typically 2 or 3 months before we even get into the rehearsal room, just to make sure that the system is the one that we want to work with, because you kind of have to, you have to make those decisions before you get into rehearsal processes. Otherwise you find that you don't have enough time to really dive into the staging, because at that moment you really want to be able to just focus on what is this going to look like on stage versus, gosh, we should really add in another projector to the system and we don't have the budget for it.
That's fantastic. And I'm just wondering now as well, you picked up on, obviously you have video in your rehearsal process and in your actual staging in some of your performances. How do the singers react to that video when they're in there and they're performing? How different is it from, say, what they would normally do in just a normal stage production?
It's very, very different. Both in the quality of acting that a singer is emitting, and also the way they need to move on stage. As much as possible, we try to make the cameras work around the singers, but for the most part, it's also that the singer they have to work very organically, so that they are letting themselves be visible to camera. And I mean, right now, people are, the amount of media literacy has increased tenfold since I've started directing in the past 10 years. And the way in which people are able to use subtlety is completely different. I mean, you can be as subtle as a movie actor when you're singing, which is not typical when you're working with singers. That's not often the training that people have.
That's really interesting. So interesting. Because in terms of my experience, I was always told, you know, the more you can give, the better, because of the people sat right at the back of the auditorium. So it must be such a change, but it's such an exciting change. And I'm sure your singers absolutely love the challenge.
It can be, I think most of them do, but it can be frustrating too, I think, because the first time that you are on stage and you're used to that type of connection, and then you realize that your face is like a billboard behind you, you know, is 20 feet high, and you realize the amount of access that the camera gives to the audience can also be very scary. To realize that you're going to have that much exposure, besides the incredible vulnerability of being on stage and singing to begin with.
Yeah. So now, thinking about your career as a whole, what has been the biggest obstacle that you've faced in getting to the point that you're currently at now?
I think probably the hardest part about what I've done, or my path, is that I didn't really give up opera or visual art. I really tried to push them both forward at the same time. And that's complicated, because you're giving so much energy just to make one thing happen, and trying to make two things happen simultaneously means there's often two groups of people, two different networks, people that you're reaching out to, and they don't have that much overlap. So that trying to make a straight trajectory, or to accomplish and to push forward one career, that's been the hardest, probably, on a certain level.
I can imagine it's a lot of dedication equally to both parts. So it takes a lot of time and energy, like you said, but you seem to be maneuvering it extremely well. Now, I'm going to ask you something else. What piece of advice do you have for young singers that are perhaps currently on young artist programs, currently in undergrad, currently postgrad? They're studying singing, they want to be opera singers. What piece of advice do you have to them at this challenging time moving forwards?
I think now is a really good time to be building networks, and to be checking in with people, and to be asking people for advice, or asking if there's been a director, or there's been an artistic director, a composer that you really want to work with. Now is a wonderful time to check in with them and see if they would be able to do an interview with you, or to have a conversation. So I think that one thing that we do have in excess is access and time, and as well, this is such an incredible time to do research. So the ability to watch, I mean, you know, so many organizations have fantastic screening projects right now, where they're screening old operas, or screening new or old work. And so that I think is an incredible opportunity to see how other people are operating right now. Because often you're so busy, you don't have time to go see
exactly.
work.
Completely. And you're right, there are a lot of people right now that are willing to be spoken to, because they're not going around the world on planes, so it's great. It's a
Mm-hmm.
good time and very good advice. Thank you. I'm sure that will help a lot of our viewers. So in terms of how you personally see this art form moving forwards after these challenging times, do you feel like there might be anything that is a positive outcome to this for our industry?
I have witnessed, I know you interviewed Justin, who is my manager, and he's been incredible at bringing together his roster to form somewhat of a community, and also to speak with other managers about how do we make the industry safer for singers, which I think that something like this often exposes cracks inside of a system. And so to
Sorry. Hello, Puskins.
sorry about that. It's the most professional interview.
All good. We love the cats here. It's very much okay.
When I think when all of this went down and so many contracts were canceled, it put singers in such a disadvantage. And so I know there's been a lot of communication and a lot of talk inside of the managerial system about how do we create different contracts so that this doesn't happen for singers. And I think that's an incredible positive, because that conversation wouldn't have been able to blossom as much as it has if we hadn't been inside of a situation where so many people are having hardship financially.
Completely.
So it's a sad outcome, but I think that it could make the industry safer on a whole.
100%. Totally agree. And I think it's a very important point to make. And I'm also wondering, what keeps you inspired during these times as an artist and as a stage director? What are you using to get your creativity flowing?
Couple different things that I've felt able to sort of leap out in. I mean, one of them, I have a wonderful singer that I've worked with for years on multiple different projects, and I kind of asked her if she'd be willing to come together with me, and we would just like see what we could film and play with. So we've been able to make some arias into video versions of themselves, and I've done that with a couple of different singers, which has been really fun and lovely to be experimenting in a different way, both for her and for myself. Because that ability to get to go in and like see situations and say, okay, if we took this, how does the meaning of this line change, or this part of the aria change? That part I miss so much. And then it's allowed me to have a lot of time to sort of explore different ways of making. So my video work, we have a project right now that's going on in Boston. I made a video piece for it, and it's being projected onto buildings. So people are able to go and socially distance and see it. This little piece of media, they're showing it at, I think, about 5 or 6 different sites around Boston. So it's been really interesting to see the different formats that people are coming up with for both engaging with audiences, showing live work. How do you bring people together? You know, it's really creative and challenging solutions.
It's really amazing, though, that you've got all of this support of network of people around you that are wanting the same thing. And like you said, you set up several places in Boston. It's just amazing that we're moving forwards in a different way, in a positive way. So
Yeah.
that's really inspiring. And I'm also wanting now to think about your future. So obviously there will be an end to this. We hope, fingers crossed, very soon.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Where would you like to be in 5 years' time?
More, just more of everything. I mean, I would love to see the opera industry come back stronger with you know, so much vigor, and I would love to be able to work both regionally and in New York City more. We'll see how that happens. Gosh, I would like to keep doing what I'm doing, and I hope that there's the opportunity to. I hope that it doesn't become harder, as it already is so hard for artists to be able to do and make what they make. She's gonna do it. She's gonna do it again.
Oh, she's off. She's off. She's so fabulous. She's brilliant.
Sweet.
Oh, sweetheart. So in terms of you, Laine, what piece of advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, to 18-year-old Laine? What would you say?
I would say that when you get older and when you look back, everything really does make sense. It seems like it doesn't at the time, but those odd passions that you end up following, um, when you see it from 50 yards away, it all becomes kind of like a fluid line.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. You have been
Of
such a joy
course.
to interview, and I've really enjoyed exploring your career. Thank you so much for joining me on Stage to Sofa.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. You are wonderful to speak with.